Australia's high immigration experiment and what it all means. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been off jet setting around the world, but I've also been away for a couple of weeks down in the beautiful Tasmania, which is a part of Australia I hadn't seen before. So we're sort of sitting back in and trying to remember how we do all this. But how are you going today, Alex?
I am going very well, and luckily not jet lagged after 7 time changes.
Yeah, it was only one. There wasn't even a time zone change in Tasmania, and I'm still finding my feet again. So I don't know how you've managed to do that.
Just kids, and therefore lack of sleep. It just becomes normal.
Oh, just the normal, right? That would explain it. So let's dig into this piece you wrote today of talking about immigration, which is a little bit of a change. We have talked about it before, but a little bit of a change from the sort of ongoing topics that we've been talking about in Insights over the last couple of weeks. So I thought it was an informative piece that really opened my eyes to a couple of issues that I hadn't really been thinking about. And I particularly wanted to start off by talking about the difference between immigration or immigrants and refugees, because when we were just discussing before we came on to record this, I was sort of saying, oh, there's all this footage and all these scenes in the US of tens of thousands of people crossing the border, and all of the sort of stories that have come out around that. And it was sort of painted in the news today that maybe in the US it wasn't such a big number. And then you were highlighting to me that they're two different types of people. So can you maybe explain that to us? What the difference is between an immigrant and a refugee, and what the story is, particularly in that US that we keep seeing the images of?
Yeah, so Title 42 finished in the US, and all these people have come to the border. And when I was in the US just recently, I was talking to people and saying, this will help your immigration, this will help with things. And they put me straight and said, there's a big difference between a refugee and an immigrant. A refugee needs to be retrained. They're low socioeconomic. They're not necessarily adding anything initially to an economy. So they're not, they've got to find housing for them, and they've got to find food for them. And they may not have the skills to immediately be added to the workforce. Whereas an immigrant, generally in Australia, we look for skilled migrants, as well as the US and the UK. So whereas Australia right now has a 300,000 to 400,000 a year of immigrants, they're skilled immigrants, and they're coming and adding straight to the workforce. Whereas in the US at the moment, they've got about a 0.4% rate of growth in their population because of immigrants, but that is not refugees. So they're totally different. And in some ways, one, it can be beneficial. And, the refugee crisis, I guess it's going on in the US at the moment, is not immediately seen as beneficial.
Right. So, it's not saying that down the track that those refugees might not be adding to GDP growth and, contributing to society. But if you're coming with nothing and arriving on the doorstep, there's training, there's cultural differences, there's a lot of things that they would have to overcome.
Yeah, an immediate cost that they've got to deal with. So, yeah, different things, really.
Yeah, okay. So that cleared that up, because initially, and I should have known the difference between, obviously I know the difference between those words and what that means, but the fact that I couldn't really identify the difference between that when I was seeing those pictures coming out in the media is a bit of a concern. So probably other people in the same boat where...
Well, I asked the same question and was put straight. So, yeah, I thought it would have been beneficial.
And particularly in Australia, because we're so removed from really being confronted by that daily, we know it, but just in the back of our heads, we don't necessarily know it front and center.
That's right.
So there was another real thread to the article today, I thought, that was interesting, around immigration and inflation. And this was something I hadn't really thought about or heard really discussed much either. So can you maybe take us through that as well? Where is this intersection between immigration and inflation from your perspective and the research that you've done?
So I was saying to you, just if anyone gets a chance, just Google immigration and inflation. And in the last probably month, in the US in particular, but in other places as well, like Canada, they've really started talking about immigration as a way to control inflation. And in fact, the CEO of Macquarie Bank was saying it in Australia not so long ago. But, what has been going on worldwide at the moment is you've got Australia and the UK with a lot of immigration. And then you've got countries like New Zealand and the US with no immigration. So they're now, the US and, you know, places like New Zealand are now talking about immigration, and if we get the immigration in, then surely the inflation will go down. But I've looked at it with what's actually happened in the UK and Australia, and it has not done that. And in fact, if you look at the current inflation figures in countries, the UK and Australia are higher than most places still. And if you dig into some of those numbers, we dug into the numbers in Australia for rent. Now, rents in Australia are up 22.2% or 22.1% year on year. And, you know, everyone was talking about the falling property prices in Australia. They stopped this year. And the reason they stopped is because we've added, or are adding, 700,000 people in 2 years to a population of 26 million. And there are not enough houses. So house prices have floored despite all our interest rate rises, and rents are now what's picking up. So we've had real wage growth of, I think, 3.7% year on year, and our rents are up 22.1%. So
they're just astronomical numbers, aren't they? Like particularly that rental number, and people do experience that. And I'm sure everyone watching this either has felt it themselves or knows of someone who's feeling that very directly.
Yeah, it's astronomical what's going on. And, you know, definitely that is going on in the UK, though I think their house prices are still falling. I didn't dig into that. But the most amazing number that I saw out of the UK recently was actually their food prices. Now, they, unlike Australia, are a net importer of food. So again, it's a finite input, just like housing. And if you go too hard, too fast, you know, your supply chains don't adjust to it. So their food pricing was up 19.1% from March to March. So it's just out of control.
So is that the mechanics then? I think I'm putting together what you said there as when you've got this really supply side you've got a supply of people coming in. So you've got this increased demand. So you're effectively saying it's demand driven and the supply chains are not keeping up. Is that really the sort of economic terminology around how immigration intersects here?
Yeah, look, the whole thing with this immigration and inflation is solely being driven by what people see as wage growth, right? So if you have more people filling jobs, wages won't go up as quickly. 100% true. Of course.
Because that's where I'm getting stuck, because it seems like that would be counterintuitive. If you've got a lot of immigration, then that would sort of lower the wage growth. But the flip side, is that what you're saying? We've got the flip side as well, is that you've got more demand.
Yeah, the flip side, and what no one's talking about and looking at is these.
Just before you just cut out, and we'll edit that to make it a little bit more seamless. But you were just talking about this intersection between, we've got the demand on one side, the supply on the other side being an issue, but also wages. And it was just such an interesting conversation. I just want to know that little bit more about, if you can tell us that little bit more about how that fits together.
Yeah, so definitely wages will be driven down. And in the US, where you need either wages get driven down or unemployment goes up, which are two anti-inflationary things. So that's great. But looking at what is going on is Australia has finite housing. The UK has finite food right now. And they are putting so much pressure on the supply chains, on the construction industry, just on housing in general, that these prices are just going up when they should be coming down. So the asset bubbles that should be deflating right now with all these interest rate rises on housing, it's stopped. I mean, we had a 7.6% drop last year in housing. We're already up 1.5 this year. People are saying 20, 30%. So we're at 6, which is crazy considering how much our mortgage payments are up. So
and that doesn't seem
so
like
inflationary.
Absolutely. And it doesn't seem like we actually have a policy response even being seriously thought about, because I know I think it was the RBA. I think it was Lowe coming out the other day saying, you know, move in with a flatmate as a solution. This sort of absolute nonsense. But we really haven't thought through the implications of this properly, have we?
No, and it is the RBA that is now saying, after having had a year of this, they're saying it's inflationary. So you've got the RBA saying it's inflationary. You've got economists and bankers saying it's deflationary. But the experience that I can see so far in the UK and Australia is it's actually more inflationary than not.
Yep.
And then on top of that, what you end up is, if you look at the news today, I went further and looked at what's happened with real wage growth. Well, Australia and UK are still well behind everyone. So we've got -2%, -3% real wage growth, whereas the rest of the world's above it. So what we're experiencing here, because of the inflationary pressures and the immigration, is actually a recession.
Yep. And you would argue that we've probably been in that for a little while already, haven't we?
Well, I mean, the data goes back six or 9 months now. So we've been in what is a real wage growth recession for at least 9 months in Australia. And the rest of the world, I mean, even New Zealand, that has a lot of issues, their real wage growth has still been positive. Their inflation rate's the same as ours.
Yep.
So that's been held back by their immigration.
And I know this isn't really part of the same conversation, but when you couple that real underperformance of real wage growth in Australia with the higher impact that we experience in the US, for example, because of our variable rate mortgages versus those US fixed rate mortgages, it really has meant we've felt it here. We've definitely felt it here.
I mean, rents, we didn't do what mortgage payments are, but they're similar. 22% jump in rents is probably smaller than what we've seen in mortgage payments,
which is just crazy.
Yeah.
So
we'll see where it goes. But from what I can see, quantitative easing, I mean, that's over. I don't think anyone can kick that can any further down the road. It's been inflationary. Look at where we are now. But now it appears that everyone's trying to answer this with immigration. This is the highest immigration. So foreign-born people now in Western countries is now the highest it's ever been.
Yep.
So they're really trying to push this, and I don't think it's going to be deflationary like what everyone thinks. I think it's inflationary again.
So that's certainly something that we're going to need to keep paying attention to, because when you're fundamentally wrong on the policy, the implications can be far-reaching, I suppose.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Everyone's looking for a solution, but the solutions that I see that everyone's putting forward are just inflationary.
Yep. Solving inflation with more inflation.
Solving inflation with more inflation. It's going to be great.
Well, Alex, thank you so much. Thanks for persevering through that little technical issue in the middle there, but that's okay. This is what happens when you're getting back from being away.
Yeah, no technical skills. I need my children around to help me figure it out.
Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, reach out with any questions or comments on social platforms. We'll get back to you on those. That's us for today. We'll be back later in the week with more insights. We'll be back next Monday with Alex as well to dig further into what's going on in this wonderful and chaotic world we live in. So thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.